I'm just a podcaster who blogs, soon to be published author. This is the Fiery Redhead from the podcast Wide Open Spaces with Elise. Thank you for joining me today for episode number 154. Treat yourself right. You can listen to this podcast anywhere you love listening to your favorite podcasts. Check me out at wideopenspaceswithelise.com. Elise is spelled Ilise. Now let's pop in our earbuds and let's listen and evolve together. Well, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so, since I'm a motivational self help mental health podcaster, blogger, and author, well, this podcast is going to focus on your mental health today. And that's why it's called Treat Yourself Right. Why? Because we don't treat ourselves right most of the time. We're worried about everyone and everything but ourselves. So, in Mental Health Awareness Month, today we are going to focus on you, just you. Now, before I move on, I want to talk about my launch of season 5. I'm actually starting my 5th year of podcasting. I don't know, number one, how I got here. Number two, how it went so fast. Number three, that I stuck with it even when I had low downloads, maybe not a lot of activity on my social media, sometimes feeling defeated. I would take a week off or 2 weeks off and then have to push myself to get back to the microphone. But I'm here and I did it. And I'm really proud of myself. And I've really been working on what season 5 is going to be. It's going to launch on May 30th. It's going to have a whole new look with me, the Fiery Redhead, a whole new theme song, and I am promising we are going to have a lot of guests. It's not going to just always be me talking here at the microphone. I'm going to have guests near, far, wherever. And I'm really excited about it. I want to change it up. It will always focus on you and self-improvement because no matter who we are, no matter what our professions are, we all need to improve ourselves. We all need to evolve. If we don't evolve, we become stagnant, and that's when things really start to crumble. So our goal together is to listen and evolve together, and we're going to listen and evolve into season 5, launching May 30th. So talking about you, your brain, and what goes on inside your body. We have all kinds of feelings and disturbances that go on inside our head, and having physical symptoms, anxiety, stress, depression, manic behaviors, having a lot of energy and not knowing what to do with it, having communication difficulties with people, not getting along with people, not being able to work in your job, feeling like you snap very easily, you have a short temper. All these things happen to us when things aren't at an even keel. And it takes a lot of work to kind of keep yourself steady in that middle ground. It doesn't just happen. And so here we are, and we're talking about you. Now, I want to go back a little bit to a time that many of us may just want to forget. And I agree with you along those lines. I'd like to forget it too. But a lot have happened during this time period for all of us. And I'm talking about the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And I know you're probably biting down on your jaw, or you're getting like the hairs on your arms are standing up. You're cringing because nobody wants to talk about the pandemic and the pandemic lifestyle because it's in the past. Yes, is COVID still around? Yes. Did I see a post flash on my phone the other day that there's a new wave of a new strain that's resistant to the vaccine coming this summer? Yes. But now we're living with it, and we know what to do when we get it, and how to be careful and clean our hands more, and yada, 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 yada. But there was something that happened during the pandemic that I'm so scared. No, I know for a fact that many of you have already lost it. Now go back, close your eyes for a minute, indulge me here. Go back to that time when it first was locked down and nobody went anywhere. No food was being delivered. Nobody was going to the grocery stores. Nobody was going anywhere. We were stuck in our houses. Your jobs all of a sudden became virtual, except if you're obviously a helper and you were having to go into your work. And yet that entailed a whole different lifestyle for you as well. And in that beginning phase, we all kind of went a little wacky. Close your eyes, keep them closed if you can, and remind yourself, after being inside for so many days, that wacky feeling you felt inside of you, that you wanted to crawl out of your skin, and just trying to wrap your brain around, how much longer am I going to have to isolate myself from the world other than the people that are living in my home with me? And I remember it was such a hard concept to think about. It was so hard to think about that I felt like when I did, I just shut down, because the anxiety that I would feel on my chest thinking that this could be longer than a couple weeks or a month. And we all know it went on for months and months and months. Heck, my daughter was home virtually for a year and a half from school. I mean, what does that do to a kid? I mean, this was their first year, that group of kids going into college. They had gaps in education and their lives were drastically affected, and I could see it in their social skills. But as your eyes are closed, and after time moved on a little bit, and your brain started to process that this isn't going away so fast, and leaving your homes or just going outside or social distancing was, remember that word, social distancing, was what our life looked like. And we started to absorb it. And maybe not fully accept it, but understand that this was a necessity. And you could either wallow in it or you could do something about it. And this is where the explosion took place. And the reason why I'm having you close your eyes and think about this is because I think we all suffer from post-pandemic amnesia. We learned and did so many new and different things during that time. But I guarantee 99.9% of you don't do those things anymore. And that's what I mean when I say post-pandemic amnesia. Because in those times, you really had to treat yourself right. Because otherwise, the anxiety would become too great. The depression would be highlighted. The short tempers would happen more often. The frustration levels would rise. Your coping mechanisms went down the tubes. And so it was sink or swim. And so many, and I would say the majority of us, figured out how to keep our heads above water. But I think you've all forgotten some of those things that you did to keep your head above water. I mean, let's face it, TikTok and social media just exploded. I mean, I've known about TikTok before all you parents knew about TikTok, when it was called Musical.ly, because my daughter kind of had a very large following at that time. And then all of a sudden, a pandemic comes and mom and dads are on TikTok and all these celebrities are on TikTok, and TikTok becomes something that blows up. It's unbelievable to watch these TikToks and what people are doing, and people from Dancing with the Stars and their dance routines that they would put and then they would share them on TikTok. All this became a source of entertainment for us. And those of us who did do social media, well, it was a way for us to have a release, to use our creativity, and to help others in the same process. I mean, that's how this podcast evolved, because I couldn't just sit back, being someone who worked in the mental health field, and do nothing when everybody was kind of in a crisis. And so I took to the microphone to kind of do therapy groups. And that's how it started for me. It's a totally different podcast now. But I would kind of bring to the microphone things that I would do with my clients, different topics, different tasks. It's evolved into something different, but anything we do in life should always evolve and morph into something new and better and bigger. And so what did you do? What things did you take up? People took up knitting. People took up painting. Families would have board game nights, sit down together and actually play board games, or have movie nights, spa days. There was a boom in bicycle sales because people were starting to buy bicycles so that they could just get out and be in nature and go and visit different places, or take nice long bike rides in parks or near the Everglades here in South Florida. And so I'm only naming a few things that I can think of. What did you do during this time? Where was your energy put? What kind of coping mechanisms did you utilize? And you might be struggling right now. Remember that post-pandemic amnesia. We've all kind of just compartmentalized that part of our lives. But there were some really positive, healthy things that we all got involved in that have kind of been compartmentalized with all the negative and the sadness. And believe me, I know that tapping into this period can be sad. My dad passed away during this time. He passed away alone because we could only go visit him to say goodbye and couldn't stay there. So I'm not negating that for many of you, thinking of this time period, there also can be a heavy weight and sadness. But in that time period, we had to figure out how to cope with all this sadness and darkness and isolation. And I go back to that word, social distancing. I mean, we were desperate, right? We wanted to be with people. But I remember thinking after I social distanced, oh God, I hope I just didn't expose myself to something. And so there was always this constant fight and to force yourself and to try to think about, okay, we were given these standards, and as long as we follow them, we should all be great. So what did you do during that time? Now the big question is, do you do any of those things now? And I bet you a lot of you, that 99.9% that I mentioned, don't do some of those things anymore. Maybe you'll do a little social TikTok once in a while. Maybe you haven't read a book, but you read a lot of books then. You did puzzles then. You did different things. You went and you researched to find different things. Watch different things. Cooking channels and baking. I mean, the baking that went on. I bet you're not baking that much anymore. Bet you those family night, those game nights have fallen to the wayside. And this was my biggest fear as a mental health professional. Because as sad as the pandemic was, I was reveling in the fact of watching and hearing people getting into their leisure lifestyle. And the type of therapy that I worked with my clients was to focus on your leisure time. And that was your coping mechanisms when you had downtime. What did you do to cope? What did you do to release the anxiety? And having to be watching people be creative because your world became very small at that time. But yet our brains became very vast and creative. And now I feel like we're all squeezing ourselves back into that mold where the creativity falls to the wayside, the expansiveness and the thought process that just expanded beyond the boundaries of imagination is shrinking again. What if we just grabbed onto it and didn't let it go? And that in times now of a healthier society, we still took those bike rides, those long bike rides. And now you're going to say to me, because I don't have the time. And yes, I understand fully, just from my own experience, working from home gave you more time to do these things. But that doesn't mean it's any less important and that you shouldn't do it now. It's all about scheduling. Scheduling your time to treat yourself right. Don't be abusive to yourself. Don't be neglectful of yourself. If you do, well, what happens? Things begin to fall apart. The stress stays bound up inside of us like a very tight ball wound up with string in a knot that can't come loose. The lump in your throat from your anxiety just kind of sits there. The migraine headaches start. The tension in your neck is getting worse and worse. And you just find yourself being snippy with people. But yet you say to yourself, I don't have the time to treat myself right. Bullshit. There's always time to treat yourself right. And guess what? More important than any of those things that you do every day, the most important thing is to treat yourself right. That sits at the very top of the pyramid. And then everything trickles down from there. If you don't have the very top of your pyramid, you're stuck. You can't move. You can't evolve. You need that top of that pyramid to be there so that it trickles down through every other part of your life. So treating yourself right should be at the very top. Before work, before mowing your lawn, before going grocery shopping, before cleaning the house. That time should be in every single day, scheduled somewhere within that 24-hour period of time. And that doesn't mean neglect sleep. That doesn't mean neglect your nutrition and taking care of yourself and your hygiene and keeping your environment clean. Yes, all those things have to do with self-care. You've got to juggle a lot of things, and I get it. We all juggle a lot. And it's a lot of balls to have up in the air. But if you don't, you can't evolve. So have you thought about some of those things? Are you kind of clearing the cobwebs and pushing away that post-pandemic amnesia and remembering some of those things that you did that were really fun? One thing that I have not done since then, maybe once, was we have the Everglades here. And the last time I went was to do my 100th episode pictures photo shoot. But we have the Everglades where you go, and right on top of the Everglades there's this big mounds of sand, and you go there and you watch the sunset. And you have these crowds of people go, and it's just this kind of spiritual, warm, enlightening experience, watching the sunset on a day, the calmness and the peace that comes over you. We did that a lot during lockdown, but yet I haven't done that other than for a photo shoot. Why not? Maybe I haven't thought about it. Maybe I haven't thought I had enough time. Maybe I didn't see it as being so important. But I should be doing that. Maybe like once a month at least. Going and doing that. Because as I'm telling you about it, I remember how good it made me feel. Cleaning away that amnesia, and I'm tapping back into that time period. And that's exactly what I want you to do. Me personally, I was very frustrated. Obviously, I'm a talker. And yet I have a lot of social anxiety. So the part of me that had the social anxiety, well, being on lockdown kind of fed into that a little bit. And let me tell you, when I had to start going back out, it was an adjustment for me to kind of build up the self-esteem and the confidence to be in crowds again. I remember I would struggle a little bit, and maybe some of you can relate to that struggle of being out in a group social situation, and just it was difficult for me. And so when I was at home, I needed to express myself. I had the podcast, but what was I doing for me, just for me? And I kind of tapped into something that I would do with my clients. I said to myself, well, what would I have done? What type of group therapy sessions would I have? And one was rock painting. And I would give my clients a rock with paint and a paintbrush and tell them to paint whatever they wanted. But for me, I wanted to have more of a focused goal, because the point of this was to get my feelings out. And on these rocks, I would paint words and colors of the frustrations that I was going through, being annoyed that I had to Zoom people to see family members, and that music was my salvation to get me through the pandemic. And so I would paint these things on the rocks. And as I'm moving on to season 5, if you go back to the beginning, and really I only changed it about 6 months ago, my logo was one of these rocks that I painted during COVID. And it was actually part of the whole production and evolution of this podcast. It started actually with that rock, and me thinking how therapeutic it was for me, and how could I translate that into podcast episodes. So I haven't painted rocks in a really, really long time. But I think I'm going to go on Amazon and I'm going to order some rocks. And whatever it is that I'm feeling and needing to get out or express will happen on those rocks. And I don't have to share them with anybody. They're for me. And that's just something that I did. And I know there are hundreds of things that you did. So let's push out that post-pandemic and amnesia and stop with the, I can't even think about that time. And focus on some of the positive things that did come out of the pandemic. And I guess with Mental Health Awareness Month and me starting a new season, moving on from where this podcast started and what it has evolved into, I guess it's kind of closing a chapter for me, because I've now brought back all those positive coping mechanisms that I used, and now I can compartmentalize them and tap into them and use them, and I can put the pandemic in the place that it needs to be in the past and move into my future. And that's what I hope you will do after listening to this podcast, after I ask you to close your eyes and envision the things and the people and the things you did. Take those positive lessons and coping mechanisms and activities that you did and pull them out from the pandemic and bring them with you, and then compartmentalize everything else that you don't want to think about or don't want to deal or just don't want to go there into that sadness, and put it where it belongs, wherever that is for you. There's always good in a bad situation. There is always some light or some positive aspect. I mean, even when you're sitting and someone's not feeling well, or sitting in an ER with someone, but yet there's some jokes that happen and you giggle, even though you may feel like crap waiting for the doctor to come in. There's always light in every situation. And that's how I would like to evolve into season 5, looking at the light, looking for the positive aspects, bringing people onto this podcast that can share their enlightenment with you. on how they've learned to treat themselves right. I want you to kind of use that as a mantra. Write it down somewhere, put it on a sticky note, stick it on your morning mirror when you're getting ready, on your coffee pot, on your Nespresso machine, in your car dashboard. Right? Treat yourself right. So you have this there every day to remind you, when am I going to treat myself right today? Because if I don't treat myself right, I can't treat anybody else good either. It's got to start from the top of the pyramid to trickle down to everybody else in your life and in your world. Thank you so much for joining me at Wide Open Spaces with Elise. Remember, positive thoughts always create positive energy. Go out and explore all those wide open spaces in your world. Look for those leisure things that you can do to help elevate your mood. And until next time, my friends, ciao. Don't forget to go to my social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit that love button, follow me, subscribe, and we can learn how to move into the future together.